Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Keller. Es folgt Herr Kollege Farage für 2 Minuten.
New values. I'm always hearing about human rights, democracy and the rule of law, and yet in 2011, when journalists in Poland were being apprehended, held and sacked for being critical of the government, what did the European Commission do? Nothing. Why? Well, of course, because Mr. Tusk, as Prime Minister, was pro the European Union. But when you get law and justice in power, who are critical of the European Union, just because they try to clear out the communist old guard and modernise their system, here you are on the verge of invoking Article 7 and taking away their democratic rights within the Union. And of course it's the same story in Hungary, where Viktor Orban, quite rightly, refuses to accept your ludicrous migrant quota programme, and he is now cast as the devil. Perhaps the real reason is that he's taking on Soros, perhaps the most dangerous man in Western democracy today. Keep going, Viktor Orban, is all that Free Democrats can say. And you're happy to interfere in every single member state where you think you see an infringement, apart from, oh, I'd nearly forgotten, Catalonia. 950 people get beaten up by the police because they want to turn out on a Sunday morning and express an opinion, a totally clear violation, Mr. Timmons, of people's human rights, an absolute abuse of any sense of a democratic process, and yet you say in that case it's none of our business. But of course, they're a pro-EU government, so the iron fist of the European Union is reserved purely for your critics. You said today you hoped that the United Kingdom would change its mind and reverse Brexit. Well, looking at the way you're treating Poland, I would have thought the answer must be a very big no. This, for Poland, is the modern-day Brezhnev doctrine of limited sovereignty. You rebelled against that system. I hope you go on, Polish people, and rebel against this one.
Now, from the Liberals, Mr. Verhofstadt, please.
When I hear, Mr. Van Orden, that you are praising Mr. Cameron's policy on refugees, well, go, maybe with me or a number of other volunteers, to the camps in Calais and in Dunkirk, where they are living in the mud, pregnant women, children, who are not allowed to come in Britain, and they are not allowed to come in. That is then the so-called open policy of a conservative government. I can tell you it's a shame when you go there and when you see in what circumstances these people have to live. Because it's easy to talk about the southern borders of Europe if you see what is happening on the western borders of Europe. And my fear is we have no longer Schengen applied in Denmark, in Sweden. What is happening if tomorrow Germany is doing that? That could be the end of Schengen. That could be the end of the European Union. Okay, that's what you want. That's what you want. You want to return to your British Empire that no longer existed. But the reality is a little bit different. And what is happening? 290 people have been relocated officially of the 160,000 proposed by the European Commission. And everybody knows that even that is theory. Because in the reality there are more than 1 million people already inside the European Union and in need of a new system. So my plea to you, Mr. Tusk, is you're going to have an exceptional summit on the 18th, I think, of February on Brexit. Well, I propose a change. Do an exceptional summit on the refugee crisis. The kind of Brexit can wait until March of April. I think that the most urgent thing to tackle now is that finally to take decisions with the member states on every of the 4 points that is necessary. A relocation system, a migration system, a new asylum system, and at the same time, the first to do a European border and coast guard. And that seems to me far more important than now to start the whole discussion about the Brexit, because it could be that you find maybe a way out for the Brexit, that Britain remains in the European Union, but it could be that we find ourselves without a European Union if we continue like that.
So, Herr Verhofstadt, Sie haben jetzt die freie Auswahl.
Now you have a choice, Mr. Verhofstadt, of a whole range of questions that people want to ask you. Actually, the entire UKIP group has things that they want to ask you, but we'll have to follow some sort of form of order. Mr. Betten was the first that wanted to pose a question. Mr. Betten, please.
Mr. Verhofstadt, you and I come from completely different points of view, but I always enjoy listening to you and I always respect what you say, because in what you say there is a very clear, honest and logical policy. It just happens to be totally different from what I believe in. You actually do believe in closer integration politically and economically. You know what the real meaning of ever closer union of the peoples of Europe means, and I respect that. The people I don't respect are the people on my own side who don't pretend to know what it means or that it isn't happening. May I ask you a question and extend you an invitation? When we have our referendum in Britain, will you please come and argue for the stay inside so that we can have an absolutely honest and clear debate?
Okay. Bitte, Herr Verhofstadt.
Yes, please, Mr. Verhofstadt.
Well, I accept the invitation. I think that the first who is laughing then is Mr. Farage. He likes that, such a thing, that to have a debate about it. But you have a little bit to go further into your reasoning. How should be the state of the British economy without the internal market in the European continent? What should be the weight of the City of London if they cannot longer trade in euros? When 70 or 80% of all the trading in the City of London is done in euros. I think that Britain has to remain in Europe, and it's completely crazy to think that you can go back in history and to do it on your own. That is not working in the globalized world of tomorrow.
Mr. Farage, on behalf of the EFDD.
I'm looking forward to Guy Verhofstadt, the Liberal Group leader, coming to the United Kingdom to take part in the Brexit debate. Your passionate defence of a United States of Europe and a European army is, I know, sincerely held, and I'm sure the Liberal Democrats will be delighted. It's now been a month. It's now been a month since the last European summit.
Okay.
And, you know, I don't know about week being a long time in politics. There's been a sea change in that month. And I think that one event has woken people up to the folly of EU leaders, the Juncker Common Asylum Plan, the Merkel call, which led to a stampede. Those of us that have warned that unlimited numbers of people from different cultures without security checks would pose a threat to the cohesion of our societies were roundly abused for doing so. And then we came to New Year's Eve. Munich. The train station, the main station, closed down because of a terrorist threat, the intelligence coming from Syria and Iraq. The very same train station that in September people had stood at, holding up their placards, "Refugees welcome." That irony was not lost on me. But it's what happened, I think, in Cologne, where we saw the mob. Up to 1,000 young males in the street sexually assaulting and harassing women. It is, I think, in many ways one of the most disgraceful public order events that we've seen in modern day Europe. And yet there was an attempt by the police and the press to cover it all up, and even the suggestion from some German politicians that German young women should change their dress and their mode of behaviour in the street, which I thought was a total insult. There's even a name for these assaults. A name for these assaults in Egypt, because they've now become commonplace and part of everyday life. And we ought to have the courage to send out a message to say these assaults must never be acceptable in any European town or city, and we'll do our damnedest to make sure that it never happens again. Now, we go to the next European summit, and Mr Cameron's going to conclude his renegotiation. I've no doubt there'll be a compromise on the fairly minor issue of migrant benefits. I've no doubt that he will come back from that summit with a few promissory notes for the future about Britain's relationship. But what he's not going to be talking about is our ability to get back control of our borders. And the British people know that those young men in Cologne, in a few years' time, will have EU passports and be free to come to Britain. And just to give you an idea of how big the sea change has been, a Daily Telegraph commentator, Alison Pearson, who had said she was undecided on Brexit, she didn't have enough information, wrote this the other day. She said, after Cologne, The EU referendum is about nothing less than the safety and security of British women. We, the Euro clueless, need to woman up and vote for the right of our daughters and granddaughters to live as they choose and to smile in the street. No more Mrs. Don't Know, let's get the hell out. I hope 2016 is our year of deliverance.
Mr. Verhofstadt wanted to respond to Mr. Farage.
His party, UKIP, has a whole record, so he should maybe take another language in this.
Okay. So,
President, is this reasonable behaviour? We've had it more than once from this gentleman. Surely we should all be equal in this chamber and treated fairly and with decency and courtesy and respect.